Early in 1933, a brand new airplane emerged from the Boeing factory in Seattle and changed the face of commercial aviation. It was the Boeing 247, a streamlined twin-engine monoplane capable of carrying 10 passengers at far higher speeds and in far greater comfort than had ever been possible. The 247 was chosen from several Boeing design studies for a new generation commercial transport. Even before a prototype flew, Boeing's sister company, United Airlines, ordered 59 247s in the hope of gaining a lead on the rest of the airline industry. The 59 airplanes would cost a total of $4 million, an extremely large amount of money in those days. The engines would be built by Pratt & Whitney and the propellers by Hamilton Standard, both companies belonging to the United Aircraft Group. United Airlines order tied up Boeing's production facility for long enough to gain an advantage on its competitors. No other airline would be able to order 247s until United dominated the market. United's enthusiasm about the airplane seemed well-founded. Boeing promised high speed and a comfortable cabin insulated from weather and noise. When the first 247 flew, it delivered everything Boeing had promised.
Well, it really was quite a revolution in that it was capable of doing 200 miles an hour, averaging that ground speed, and it was also much quieter because the engine was not in the fuselage. The retractable landing gear, the constant speed propellers, all made it much faster and smoother, but it didn't carry too many people. But it was the forerunner of the modern airliner, for sure.
The 247 made its first transcontinental flight on June 12, 1933, where the TAT tri-motor service took 48 hours with the help of overnight trains. The 247 could make the trip by itself in around 20 hours. By that time, 30 247s were flying, and United's immense gamble appeared to be paying off. Passengers loved its speed and comfort. But for an airplane with such an immense initial impact, its service life was very short. This is one of the 4 Boeing 247s still in existence. It's being restored by the Seattle Museum of Flight. When it goes on display, it will be a tangible record of a great, if fleeting, achievement in air transportation. In designing and building the 247, Boeing made a conscious decision to favor a medium-sized airplane because of lower operating costs and higher speeds. The 247's fuel consumption was 360 gallons per 1,000 miles, compared with the Ford Trimotor's 675. But the Boeing airplane's 10-passenger capacity and its minimal potential for expansion was a major factor in its lack of long-term success. The cabin was narrow, and the spar of the cantilever wing had to be negotiated by any passenger walking up the aisle. A D model, faster and with a number of improvements, was introduced a year after the release of the original 247, but the improvements achieved too little and came too late. Small capacity was not the only reason for its demise. Another was the strategy of Boeing and United Airlines in keeping the 247 to themselves. It simply backfired. Donald Douglas, on the right, became a major figure in American aviation in 1921 when he set up his aircraft company at Santa Monica, California, and started to manufacture a series of successful airplanes, including the Douglas World Cruisers that became the first airplanes to fly around the world in 1924. Donald Douglas's daughter, Barbara, grew up as her father's company was expanding and his reputation as an aircraft manufacturer was growing. The Douglas home in Los Angeles was frequently visited by the small group of men whose vision was leading the development of the American aircraft industry. Barbara got to know them and admire their dedication to business.
They were very devoted Americans. They saw something that needed to be done, to be built. This was a mode of transportation that the world could enjoy, and for themselves it wasn't in there. I don't know. Maybe it's the Scottish background. I don't know what it is, but they were not great money grabbers. My father used to say that all of his contracts early on with the military, that's before the World War II, were by a handshake. And that meant that whatever that price was, in 2 years when I produce it, or 1 year, that's what it will be. And after I have to hire the first lawyer, that's when I'm in trouble. We should be able to do business as gentlemen.
By the early 1930s, Donald Douglas and the heads of the other great aircraft companies had become powerful men.
I guess what people don't realize is there were so few people in the aviation business. We all knew each other. It would be less than 5 or 6 people that were involved in all of this. That's incomprehensible now.
At airfields around the country, people who could afford the cabin monoplanes and sporty biplanes of the late 20s and early 30s enjoyed aviation as a leisure pursuit. Many women learned to fly and contributed to the growth of aviation as a sporting activity. Surprisingly, for the daughter of one of America's great aviation families, Barbara Douglas was not one of them.
I didn't like it at all. I did very little of it. In fact, really, I never went in a small plane, and I still almost never will. They've got to have a couple of engines for me. I always listen for them to be sure they're working.
In 1932, Transcontinental and Western Airlines approached Douglas for a new airplane able to compete with United's Boeing 247s. The airplane that emerged from Douglas was the DC-1. It could carry 12 passengers, just 2 more than the Boeing 247. Only one was built. In 1934, it gave a taste of things to come when it flew airmail across the continent in just over 13 hours, taking 5 hours off the existing record. Its successor, the DC-2, could carry 14 passengers. The first DC-2 flew in May 1934, just a year after the introduction of the Boeing 247. The DC-2 emerged at a critical time. In early 1934, the new Postmaster General responded to accusations of collusion between the airlines in dealing with airmail contracts. As a result, President Franklin Roosevelt canceled all existing agreements. It was a major blow to the airline industry. When the Army agreed to fly the mail, several Army pilots were killed. Eventually, the service was returned to the airlines, but the mail subsidy was reduced and the large holding companies abolished. The DC-2 became available at the right time to take advantage of the situation and was immediately successful. By the middle of 1934, Douglas had orders for 75 aircraft. Barbara Douglas had the job of christening some of them.
I unwrapped an airplane in red cellophane over in San Fernando Valley at the old airport, which is now where the Lockheed Corporation began and their headquarters, that particular airfield. I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, there I am, and it's totally covered in red cellophane. I think it is a TWA plane. I don't think it's been done before or since, but it was a little different than christening one with champagne.
In the 1930s, one of the most colorful figures in aviation was Colonel Roscoe Turner. He was famous for his feats in the air, but just as famous for his pet lion Gilmore, which was named after one of his sponsors. As long as Gilmore was small enough, he went along on Roscoe's flights equipped with his own parachute.
We had a very nice trip, although we had considerable storms. And we had a nice time in New York, didn't we, boy? Didn't we have a nice time in New York? Huh?
In 1934, a great air race was organized by Australian millionaire Sir Macpherson Robertson. It was to cover 11,500 miles from England to Australia. It was divided into a handicap section and an all-out speed dash halfway around the world. Roscoe Turner and Clyde Pangborn entered in a brand new Boeing 247D, modified with long-range fuel tanks. The race was due to begin on October 20th, and Turner spoke before he and Pangborn left for London.
As you know, we are going over to London to participate in the Mac Robertson International Race from London to Australia. And this race, of course, is the longest race ever conceived in history. And this is one time when weather will not get any consideration. When we start, we have to keep going.
Turner explained his reasons for choosing a standard commercial airliner to fly in a competitive event like this.
Why we have selected this standard Boeing plane, because of its dependability, its speed, and its durability.
Before the race, the 247 wasn't seen as a potential winner. The image of a commercial airliner, even one as innovative as the 247, did not sit comfortably with the idea of air racing. There was a wide variety of airplanes entered. Some had no chance in the speed section of the race and hoped for a good placing on handicap. The British de Havilland Company designed an airplane especially for the race. It was called the Comet. One of the 3 Comets entered was piloted by C.W.A. Scott and T. Campbell Black.
We like the machine tremendously, and we hope a great deal for the machine, because we think it's capable of quite a lot. We haven't done very many tests on it yet, but we're very full of hope.
American Jackie Cochran was flying a single-engine Granville Brothers GB.
Saturday morning in the race. We're having difficulty with the flaps on the airplane, but if we can overcome that, maybe we'll reach Melbourne, and if we don't, well, we're here anyway.
The King of England was present for the start of the race early in the morning of October 20th, 1934.
In the grey light of dawn, all is set for the start at 6:30.
At 6:30 a.m., the first of the 3 British Comets took off.
Flag drops. They're off. The race has started.
Compared with the Comet, Turner and Pangborn's 247 looked big and slow. There was another new American commercial airliner in the race, but it was entered by the Dutch airline KLM. It was a new Douglas DC-2. Jackie Cochran's GB was fast, but it had reliability problems. Jackie dropped out of the race in Romania. As predicted, the de Havilland Comet of Scott and Campbell Black was the first airplane into Melbourne, but the next 2 were surprises. They were the airliners, the KLM Douglas DC-2 and Roscoe Turner's Boeing 247. The KLM DC-2 took first place on handicap. The Boeing 247 took second place in the speed section and third place overall. An English reporter saw the significance of the performance by the 2 American airliners. He wrote that America now had hundreds of standard commercial airplanes with a higher top speed than the fastest airplane in regular service with the British Royal Air Force. But while the 247 performed beyond expectations, it had been beaten by a direct competitor. Its brief period as the fastest airliner in the world was almost over. In spite of their high performance and luxury appointments, the new airliners could still be unpleasant to fly in if the conditions were not quite right.
They bounce and they go up and down, and so does your stomach. So, of course, my concern was those nice little bags that none of you pay attention to anymore in airplanes, but were very, very helpful on that flight.
The Boeing 247 competed successfully with the DC-2 for a while, but when the DC-3 entered service in mid-1936, the battle was lost. The DC-3 arose out of American Airlines' need for a competitive transcontinental sleeper transport. The DC-2 wasn't wide enough, and Douglas reworked the design to increase the wingspan and lengthen and widen the body. The design changes had an immense effect on the potential of the airplane. American Airlines sleeper version had 14 berths, but the day plane version could accommodate 21 or more seats, more than twice the capacity of the Boeing 247. Given the reduction in mail subsidies, the airline suddenly had access to exactly what they needed, an airplane that could make money just by carrying passengers. The final indignity for Boeing occurred in 1936. United Airlines was no longer allied with Boeing. Realizing that its fleet of 247s had been outclassed, it ordered 5 DC-3s and 10 of the sleeper versions, the Douglas Sleeper Transport. The success of the DC-3 was not confined to America. Douglas already had substantial international sales with the DC-2, and now orders for the DC-3 poured in from all over the world. By 1938, DC-3s carried 95% of America's commercial airline traffic. The same year, they were being operated around the world by 30 different airlines. In 1939, DC-3s carried 90% of the world's airline traffic. Their potential was recognized by the military, and they were manufactured in large numbers for the armed forces, becoming famous as the C-47.
My mother had a wonderful statement. If you didn't build them so well, they'd buy more. But that was just a joke in the family, because they have lasted. They're still flying them today.
When production finished in 1947, more than 13,000 DC-3 civil and military variants had been built. Around the world, they were given many different names. In England and Europe, they were known as the Dakota. In America, they're remembered as the Goonie Bird. For airplanes designed in the early 30s and built before 1947, those still flying are capable of impressive performance. This display is being flown by the Dutch Dakota Association, one of the many organizations around the world that are dedicated to keeping this extraordinary airplane flying. As the wheels touch, the pilot orders full throttle. The old DC-3 performs a perfect touch and go. The DC3 is one of the most important airplanes in the history of aviation. It has had immense influence in expanding the frontiers of flight.